Record. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Rope-a-Dope Room just outside Philadelphia. I have the great pleasure today of having an in-depth conversation with Robert Flatow and Paige Hamilton, who've recently released Fairy Tale Aliens on Rope-a-Dope. So we're going to jump into the Zoom room and connect. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you both. I hope you are safe and healthy. And I'm switching cameras. There we go. Just to pre-pave there. You know what? I'm going to let it go. We'll talk a little bit about your history, but I'm not going to do the traditional introduction. You guys know who you are, and people are going to watch this and learn who you are in this process. I want to go back. I always love when we get a really unique album here at Rope-a-Dope, and it happens often. And there's always that question about which one is the most unique. And you guys are definitely, and you know this, right? You're definitely up there in the most unique music that has arrived at this little record label. And I don't fully, I pride myself on knowing a pretty good amount of history from the New York scene and the different styles of music that are out. But this is really a whole new lane for me. So let's start with you, Paige. You made a reference as we were coming in to the different types of metal or the different types of music that you've been classified as over the years. Yeah. Can you give us some background on what was the first one? Where does this start and how did it evolve?
We were an, quote unquote indie rock band when we started. That's in, New York City, Lower East Side, CBGB's audition night. And we listened to noisy music, like from Sonic Youth and Rat Hour and Live Skull and stuff like that. But I also loved, I grew up on, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC and that thing. And I love stuff that grooved. I'm a huge jazz nerd, as most Helmet fans know, and spend every day still fantasizing about, becoming Wes Montgomery. And so all these things kind of went into Helmet. The sort of parallels, Rob and I were in a band together in the 80s in Brooklyn. And I learned so much from Rob because my Helmet sort of the discipline of we are rehearsing 3 days a week. I don't care if your parents are in town, your brother, or it's your birthday or what holiday it is, we're rehearsing. And we did that with our band in the 80s in Brooklyn. We were there come hell or high water. And that's how I ran Helmet. I learned, if you want to do this music, you rehearse and there's nothing is more important. And so when I kind of moved on, I joined a band called Band of Susans after I left Rob's band. And I decided to form Helmet. Rob, I think the timetable with Malumbo is we were kind of existing in a parallel universe, and I started hearing Malumbo, and I'm like, this is incredible music. And so Rob and we've known each other for a million years, and I said, one day we have to work together. I want to be part of this Malumbo thing. I take no credit for the Malumbo sound, and that's Rob's genius. And Rob just developed this thing with our lead singer, may he rest in peace, from our Brooklyn band, who was a great trumpet player and singer and a beautiful human being, and our drummer that was in our band back then. I went to see Malumbo shows, and I loved it. So I said, Rob, you're going to let me, participate in this and be part of this at some point. And so over the years, I'd have a day off in New York. Helmet would be on tour. I'd come and record. We'd work. Well, next thing we know, 5-6 years later, we've got a couple of albums worth of material. And so Fairy Tale Aliens, it took us a while, but we finally got it out. And I'm really proud to be part of it. And as I said, I can't take any credit. I'm just there contributing as I say, I call it my shit sculpting. It's not really guitar playing, I guess. Sometimes it's guitar playing, but there's jazz, my jazz influence there. And with Malumbo, it's like they're free. Some of it is free. Some of it, there are chord changes that are disguised, and so there's pop music. We love the Beatles. We love the Kinks together. Rob and I grew up with very parallel, like we both love Blue Oyster Cult and the Kinks, and we saw the Kinks together, So those things all kind of are, are part of what Malumbo and what the Malumbo Page Hamilton album is. And we have, there's more in the future, believe me. We have, it's really fun. We spend, as I said, it took a while to get to this point, but it's.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
I want to get back to that time. I think that if you take, Helmet, Malumbo, Page Hamilton separately in the context of today, it doesn't fully make sense. So we were talking early 80s here. Is that
mid 80s? Yeah,
early to mid 80s,
yeah.
Right? And so what's happening in music? Tell me if you agree. Is this sort of polish that's going on for popular music? Everything's sort of going through that digital filter. Yes.
Seems like everywhere except for the Lower East Side of New York, where there are so many incredible musicians that just don't give a rat's ass what's going on in the rest of the world. And I feel so lucky to have been part of that. People talk about a scene, and back then we were like, there's no scene, we're just musicians. And I look back now, I go, wow. You could walk from Lismar Lounge to CBGB's to the Pyramid and hear a band. I mean, we're talking blocks,
Pyramid on Avenue A?
Avenue A, yeah, where you had
with the mannequins on the wall.
Yeah, and the transvestite dancers on the bar, and
go-go dancers,
just an incredible place. We opened for Nirvana there. Like about the first time Nirvana ever played New York, the first show they ever did without their second guitar player, Helmet, and I mean, like Iggy Pop was at the show, and Sonic Youth and Mark Rebo, all these heroes of ours. And I remember talking to Thurston Moore a couple of years later. He's like, it was our second or third show ever. And he said, you guys were just too much, man. I was like, what are these guys? This is just painful, and we were, but it was just a great time in the city. There was so many. Brownies had started just a little after those places.
Danceteria.
Yeah, it was just, and obviously, so with CB's and CB's Gallery, there was something. I saw Mark Ribot and the great keyboard player. I think he's on your guys' label. Oh God,
John Medeski.
Medeski, yeah. I saw those guys play at the Gallery. It was like mind blowing. Just like I saw Don Cherry at the Continental across from.
Wow, he was our mentor.
Don Cherry and
yeah,
Sylvain.
He was our mentor.
Like you're sitting there having a potato pancake and watching Don Cherry. It was like phenomenal, and for me being a jazz nerd, St. Mark's back then, that's where one of my all-time heroes, Coltrane, played with another all-time hero, Monk, in this little, at the 5 spot. Right there.
Ornette too is his.
Ornette, yeah. It was, where Coltrane's wife recorded that stuff that was released later as Discovery when they had the live train Monk stuff, which is just mind-blowing. I just was lucky. It was just dumb luck that I moved to New York with $500 and decided this is what I'm going to do with my life. And I happened to get to the city, and there was just everything was happening. Everything. I met Glenn Branca and Reese Chatham, played with both of them, and Glenn was a huge influence on me. He did the Symphony for 100 electric guitars. I later played here at the Disney Hall with Mike Watt, another hero who I did an interview couple of weeks ago. So Glenn was, there were different guitar players in like John from Rat at Rat R, and I think somebody from Live Skull. Sonic Youth folks were in Glenn's ensemble. So it was all sort of this incredible stew of great musicians. And for me, I wouldn't have known if I'd stayed in Oregon. I never would have heard all this amazing music. Rob and I rehearsed religiously out in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and I would pick him up in my Learning Annex. I was delivering Learning Annex magazines. I'd pick him up and we'd grab a diner burger and head out there. And we had a great recording studio. Our bassist was a great engineer, John DiMaggio, and I produce now and have produced for Gavin Rossdale from Bush and many albums and stuff. That's where the beginning of me learning how to become a producer. From Rob and John were both so good, and it was just really for me my musical roots. That's where I went from, being a nerd in grad school at Manhattan School of Music to learning, about all this music, and it was this center of the universe, to me.
There was a certain dirtiness in Lower Manhattan at the time.
In all of New York, in that van he's talking about, we would be attacked by packs of wild dogs in Greenpoint. They would attack the van.
Wow.
Van was
like
broken.
the Wild West out there.
Yeah, van was broken into several times. I got held up at knife point, at broad daylight, 5 PM, like just it was. And we went to a party once, and it was Rob and I and a few of our friends, and Avenue A there were tumbleweeds rolling down Avenue A.
Yeah.
Freezing cold, and we were like, "Are we sure we want to go to this neighborhood?" And it was just a crazy, the city was very, very different back then. And I'm not saying, the good old days or whatever, but man, there was a lot of great music that came out of
There
that.
were a lot more autonomous zones. I mean, Page is sketching out a map of early Helmet with New York and all these places. And for Malumbo, it was a different set of clubs where the people did go back and forth. For us, it was the Knitting Factory, and then you had DJ Spooky at Vaughn, and then you had the Cooler and Baktoon. And
Cooler.
Exactly. There were 5 million places we dealt with. The only thing I can compare it to now, the Fez, right? The only thing I can compare it to is when I went to Jerusalem, the old city, and saw within like a 20-block radius, here's where the Last Supper was. And here's where Christ was crucified, and right here was the Passover he had the night before, and that's how New York was. As he says, you could just walk a few blocks and it all was happening, and there were all these autonomous zones that did collide. Ambient, a lot of genres, people have missed, grime, dubstep.
Not dissimilar to hip hop colliding into the mainstream. With the Bronx coming down to CBGB, coming down to the Lower East Side, right?
Yeah.
The curious thing for me, and Rob, maybe you can speak to this, is like that dirtiness and all that excitement, and just to set the stage for people who know New York now but don't know it then and are hearing this as this sort of it's not romanticism. Tribeca really didn't exist. I mean, it existed as the triangle below Canal Street, but nobody was in there. Some people lived there and they went to their offices uptown, and that was about it, right? So there was nothing. And you went to Avenue A, you didn't go across Avenue A, right? The entire Lower East Side was, which is now, quote, thriving, was just sort of almost like another country. So it's for real. And then right there in that pocket and in other pockets, there was just, people just playing, all the time. And it didn't matter the genre, you go to the Lone Star, and there were the folkies were there, like it was all there. Right.
Yeah. But Wetlands on the West Side. That was reggae.
A little bit later. Yeah.
Important.
So just setting the stage there. So Rob, like how do you feel that environment influenced the sound? Like,
definitely. I mean, there's always this thing. I think Brian Eno calls it genius. I don't know if I would use that term, but there's a thing where, people would hear old music of mine and go, well, what was it that you turned to ethnic music and drum machines in the late 70s? Is it because someone did something? And I go, no, it was just in the air. It was like in scientific discoveries, every idea has been developed independently at least twice. Someone wrote a book about it, and then they were told, oh, you're not the first book on it. And it goes, that proves my point. Leibniz discovered calculus at the same time someone else discovered it. It's just in the air. It's like, waiting to break all the rules that are just waiting to be broken, and back then there was a lot of support for this. I remember when Malumbo started, the guy who managed Tower Records just decided to become our manager and take control of the whole thing. It was a different world. I mean, but for better or for worse, that world's coming back, because New York's really reaching a 70s vibe here. The rich are leaving. People are moving to the suburbs. The latest report is 1 in 3 people are unemployed here.
Yeah, the whitewash is washing off.
Yeah,
it's peeling. Paint is cracking.
Wow.
So it might be a good time for artists again, because a lot of that was because of affordability and other things,
Well, also, I mean, it's funny as we face as a nation, as a global species, these kinds of new old challenges, and people wonder how they can get through them, and you know, what are we going to do when you hit that panic? You know, the sky is falling. And you look back on the 20th century, and really, I mean, the greatest art in the world was created in the midst of World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, the Holocaust. You know, so all during this time, art seems to have, it's almost inversely proportional sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
To the positive energy. And it doesn't, I never believed the thing that you had to suffer, you know, to create great art. But maybe that's because I feel like I've suffered and I've never created any great art. But
Well,
maybe you could speak to that.
diamonds.
I want to, like, did you look at the popular culture and see some of the like commercial sort of packaging that was going on, both sonically and look wise in popular music in the 80s, and say, I'm not going to do that. We need to go in the other direction. Was that a conscious process?
I
Kind
think
of
more
both.
with age. Yeah, I think more
kind of
with age.
Yeah, kind of both. Like I always joke about, I have this, you know, ESP guitar company in Japan. That have done my signature model guitars. And I remember with CBGBs, there was a sort of group where that the look was you had to have a beat up Fender Mustang, long hair, and bury the vocals under, you know, noise. And I'm like, nobody was, it was more than kind of noisy stuff. And I felt like, you could just, your look didn't matter at all. Like we were just four nerds. And in fact, our bass player had dreadlocks when he joined the band. And then it was after 6 months on the, you know, going on the road, he was like, this is just too hot, you know, and he cut his hair off. So all of a sudden we have four guys with short hair. Oh, that's a marketing concept. I'm like, yeah, we planned that, you know, we're wearing shorts because it's 120 in Florida, and one guy has to sleep in the van in New Orleans. You know, every night one guy has to sleep in the van, right? You rotate because you can't leave the gear on the streets. And I drew New Orleans one night, and it just, you know, it's all just kind of practical, trying to, you know, we disconnect the odometer, drive to Minneapolis, spray the WD-40 under there. And, you know, all these things were born out of necessity. We just wanted to play music, and we weren't, I think when we look at the 80s, when you look at the 80s music, I wasn't reacting to anything necessarily, just going like, doesn't interest me. You know, getting dressed up in shoulder pads and a skinny tie is cheesy to me, and I'm lazy. I just want to play I just want to play heavy music that, you know, is inspired by Led Zeppelin meets, you know, A Love Supreme or whatever, you know, and somehow in there's this thing that comes. And our drummer, he was like, he turned me on to a lot of hip hop stuff, Eric B and Rakim and Boogie Down and stuff like that. And then he got into drum and bass, so I got Square Pusher and all that stuff. And he was always listening to that. Our bass player was Hank Williams and Saul Hu'upi'i, lap steel. And I was in this Ray Vaughan Williams and, you know, Still Coltrane and Monk kind of thing. And I never liked to share my music with anyone because I was like, it's personal to me, you know, and how people like play their music. I'm self-conscious, and I'm like, they don't want to listen to, you know, Thelonious Monk, so that's cool with me. But all these things end up sort of influencing where you are. When Rob and I were in the band together, it was the 80s, and it was the mid 80s, and there was a lot of, you know, the stuff like Robert Palmer and Peter Gabriel had that huge album and stuff, and we had elements of that in our pop stuff that we were writing. But I think at a certain point, we just, you know, we just kind of moved forward, and I think it's good to absorb those pop influences and then, you know, put it through your own filters. And our filters, Rob too, where we grew up, you know, listening to jazz music, and so our heroes are these cats that were, you know, I mean, I went to see Archie Shepp at 7th Street entry or Sweet Basil. You could buy one cocktail and sit at the bar for the whole night. And I stood nose to nose with Archie Shepp. Like, he stood there looking at me and, hey, what's up? Like, it's just those kind of things you can't. Elvin Jones hugged me because I was probably crying the first time I saw him play at the Vanguard, you know. Or seeing Flora Prima and Ayrton Moreira, and when you're this far from them, you know, you know, it's just, it's amazing that, I saw Albert King and I was this far from him. That's accessibility to music, and you absorb these things. And if you're any kind of musician whatsoever, you're trying to develop your own vocabulary. And these things sort of are the paint colors that they sort of become part of your palette. They're in your palette. I don't know if I'm describing it well, but
No,
yeah.
that makes perfect sense. I wonder if Rob could speak a little bit. Rob, can you talk about some of your influences?
Well, the scene we're talking about actually like predates us. I mean, the first club I went to was Slugs on I think it was Avenue C and 3rd Street. And this was the 70s, where the police wouldn't go beyond Avenue A.
That's where Lee Morgan was shot.
That was the first show I saw. Lee Morgan's wife shot him at the end of the show, and I was hooked. This was like that. This is for me,
Yeah.
And we were 12 years old. Back then in New York, they would serve you alcohol and let you into any jazz club at 12. And I remember shortly after that seeing a show with Ornette Coleman at Slugs, where he had everyone he had ever played with. People we had never heard of at the time. Bobby Bradford and Don Cherry was explaining to me, oh, he was before me. And Ed Blackwell. And I was thinking, what would that experience be worth today? I think it was like $3 cover, and you didn't have to buy a drink. You were taking your life in your hands to go there. As one friend said, there's probably snipers in the trees. Yeah. But to have, and all the Ornette people were also wonderful. They would just speak to anybody. They didn't, care, what can you do for me?
Yeah.
They would just give up their time. And it was shocking years later to discover they were all heroin addicts, except for Ornette.
Yeah.
Just didn't parse it all, because you associate heroin use with being evil and hawking your friend's horn. But these were the sweetest, most generous people. And Jane Ira Bloom, who we're doing the next record with, worked with Charlie Hayden and Ed Blackwell and said the same thing. She was shocked to see them shooting up. And Don Cherry, who you mentioned, was an early mentor of Malumbo. And the only way I could tell he was on heroin is he would want to talk about business a little bit. And I would explain to him, there is no business, because unlike Page, he's much braver than me. I mean, one reason Page said why he wanted to work with us, why I wanted to work with Page. He's a dear friend who I've known more than half my life, and which is a considerable length at this point. The first conversation we had, we were singing Lonely Woman by Ornette Coleman to each other in our first phone call, including the solos. So I knew this was like a kindred spirit. But Page's just drive and hunger and just fortitude to doing this is unsurpassed. I worked with a lot of A-list musicians, and no one comes close to this guy, because I'm a coward in comparison. I work for other people. So it was easy for me to put the Molumbians through anything I wanted. We're going to do this. This is crazy. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't like, and still isn't the first thing putting, food on my plate. You know what I mean? So we had a certain luxury, due to some cowardice on my part, because I work mostly in commercials and for other artists, and I get a big thrill out of just making people happy. In that context, it's a service industry. Is it right? Is it wrong? I don't know. You tell me. You paid for it. You're really happy, then it's right. You know what I mean? But with my own music, it's not like that, of course. And it would have been a terrifying thing to just say, okay, this is all I'm going to do. You know what I mean?
Right.
We're looking forward to, when I was, as you guys know, in New York, and we were about to start rehearsals for the Fairy Tale Aliens. We're doing the record release show, which I was very excited about. And this right, I think it was the 6th of March, I was out there, and by I think the show was supposed to be on the 17th or something like that. And that's when everything hit the fan. And it was like, oh my God, this is for real. The gigs were, and there was no way we could play the show, unfortunately. Hopefully maybe we can do a belated album release show or something, because it was
100%.
I was so excited. I was looking forward to meeting you guys, you Louis, in person, and just very, we can't appreciate so much the showing faith in this music that's anything but mainstream, as you said, one of the most unique things you've ever had on the tables.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's funny looking back. At the time, I remember, you know, the question, the doubt about whether to cancel or not, you know, whether to do the show. But I just had some information from Christian Scott, Tunde Ajwa. So they had 5 nights at Blue Note from the 10th to the 15th.
Oh my!
So the first 3 nights, everything was fine, and the drop off on the 14th and 15th in attendance was like noticeable, and they were reminded of it recently because they recorded the shows.
Oh wow!
So you can hear the exodus of people in the process of listening to those. So the 17th would have been an absolute letdown, I think.
I was convinced when my great pal and hero mentor David Torn was going to be playing with us. Yeah. David has he had a brain tumor at one point. He has serious health issues, as does his wife Linda, and he was doing college shows, and he had to come home. He said, Paige, this is I can't, there's no way I can risk this. It's very, very dangerous. And after I spoke with him, I was like, that's it, we can't risk this. And we didn't want to put anyone, obviously.
The date was actually the 21st or the 23rd, and by that time it was illegal. There was it just couldn't have happened. And I remember the venue was very nice about it, but when I canceled, they still didn't. They were like, okay, we understand, but they still didn't understand the depth of the situation themselves. I mean,
yeah, they were because when I emailed the guy, the promoter, he was like, oh, we're gonna have the show at this point. And this was, let's say, about this, mid-March, whatever. But
I remember trying to explain to him, Joe's Pub has closed. You're going to be closing soon. Yeah. They were very nice about it, but they still thought we were perhaps over cautious. But by the time the show was to happen, there were no shows. I mean,
right, holding out hope.
Yeah.
So there's one question. You can decline it. Some folks find it challenging. I'll preface this. In my time in working in the music business and reflecting on, what people are listening to and why some of the music that we find so enticing and is of such high quality, why it isn't more popular. I look at things like businesses like the wine business, craft breweries, craft wineries, craft distilleries. And I think one of the things that they've done very effectively is sort of give people an idea of how to begin with tasting, how to recognize quality. Can you say anything to the fans as they would approach this album as sort of a guideline of sort of how to listen to it?
I don't think you need to know anything, as with most music that was considered avant-garde. I think the biggest issue really is because there is a huge audience out there that loves the music me and Paige are name checking. The problem I've found in recent years with Malumbo is, to them, this is an historical museum piece kind of thing. In other words, okay, now there's all these people, where were they at the time? I don't know, but decades later, there's all these people say, yeah, we love John Coltrane, we love Captain Beefheart, we love this, but they can't conceive that someone could actually be taking music beyond that. And the only thing I can think of comparable is when Ornette started doing electric stuff. It would have been almost more palatable to people if he started like just making horrible noises on the saxophone, because that would have been, okay, that makes sense. It's Gronk music, but the fact that he was playing completely tonally, made it challenging. I mean, the fact is, my friend Jed, who does the art to our albums whenever I'm stuck and have no idea what to do, he's kind of a normal guy. Yeah, there you go. To him, there's nothing weird about it, because in a way, there's nothing strange about it. I mean, to me, this album is just an instrumental rock album. You know what I mean? I do realize that it's much more challenging than any instrumental rock album, but I don't think that's our fault so much as the conservatism of music and the fact that people think wild and exciting music has already been done. And there's nothing to go beyond that. And if it was beyond that, it would just be chaos, you know, and that could almost be accepted as free jazz. But I think the big challenge is that it's not chaos, you know, that it's people playing together, really reacting, that it's really tight. I'm curious about the next album. We're involved with the page that comes out with you in October, which is more of a jazz record. You know, and I'm curious if that makes a difference, the fact that you could almost say it's a genre, you know, it's jazz of some sort, whereas this album, I agree, like, what the heck would the genre be? You know, I say it's pop rock, Page is laughing, but I'm like, I don't know, to me, it's like an update of the Ventures or something, you know?
It's funny. I mean, some things come to mind when you say that, and if you don't mind, I just like, I mean, I'm reminded of the Ramones, first of all, strangely enough, because, you know, they were like, you guys are, what is this, punk rock? And they're like, what are you talking about? We're just playing these pop songs that we love.
Yeah.
what are you talking about? This is what we're doing. But I reflect on this often, and looking at like the entire Rope-a-Dope catalog, and as well as many of the other independent labels that are out there, and stuff that's just not on a label. And I don't, what I would say to the audience, and it didn't come to me until you said that just then, is like, that's right. You're doing new things. This is probably the most progressive time in music history. You know, it's just that it's the focus is dispersed around it, and people are not really paying attention. And they do have that filter on that says, you know, as Christian puts it, you know, people that believe that the best jazz has already been played. You know? And that's just. They're going to figure it out at some point, like they did with most art, right? Impressionism, etc.
I agree.
You know, it's just the question is when. I vote for now.
I look at in the rock world, when Helmet came out, the stuff that was popular, Poison, Winger, Warrant, that was metal, quote unquote, and now there's this in that world anyway, this sort of fascination with, I mean, not fascination, with this complete dependence on Pro Tools, quantizing and tuning stuff. And at a certain point, I found when Helmet came out, kids were getting sick of the Poison, Winger, Warrant. They wanted something different. And with us, with Malumbo, it's, you know, it's not, you know, quantized and tuned. In part of the beauty, I mean, part of the beauty of Iggy Pop or the Doors, whatever, is like they don't sing perfectly in tune. It's a human element, and people need that. And kids, I mean, it starts with, I keep saying kids, you know, could be 30 years old for whatever, but they get sick of stuff. They, you know, getting crammed down their throat in this corporate kind of way. And those are the people that will discover this music, because we are playing. There are quite a few covers. We did actually a Helmet cover on the album, and you know, the majority of the Helmet fans were released. It were like, it was, you know, complete.
I wouldn't say a majority, a few. And that was to be expected. I warned Paul because it was Paul's idea to do this, and he thought he's just doing a public service. And I told him, well, that's where you're going to get.
Yeah, not a majority. Yeah, a few of them had a complete meltdown.
Yeah. A vocal minority. Yeah.
Yeah. This iconic track to them. Like, that's sacrilege. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, well, I don't, you know, but I think, you know, I think people are looking for, you know, are always curious and looking for, you know, for something interesting and new, because I know for me, growing up in a small town, my friends are listening to, you know, what was it, like Boston Journey, Foreigner, and Toto, and I was like, that doesn't do it for me. So I wanted to find something that was my own. And I heard Black Sabbath, and I go, that works, you know. And I heard AC/DC, I'm like, that works, you know. And I think if the music is out there, we put it out, and people have a chance to you know, to hear it, they're gonna get into it. I mean, it's not inaccessible at all. As Rob said, there are, you know, there's many layers of things going on, and we might start with in the chord changes to You Really Got Me and end up in a completely different place. But that's, you know, I think also, you brought up Coltrane. I think about when he was pushing forward so quickly. I mean, he went from hard bop, and when, you know, after he was with Miles, and then Monk, and then he started doing the freer stuff, and people were calling it anti-jazz, and like, he was like, I don't care what you call it.
Yeah.
You know, really, call it whatever you want. He's music. He was into his last show was Baba Olatunji at the, it was on the west side of 7th or 8th Avenue, I guess.
African Cultural Center, yeah.
Yeah, and I went to see Baba Olatunji, and it was one of the greatest concerts I ever saw. I went because Coltrane turned me on to him, you know what I mean? And so I gave a lesson the other day to a guy who's like, thank you, by the way, for turning me on to John Coltrane. I'm like, you're welcome, because I wrote a piece on it like 25 years ago in some rock magazine. I said, this is John Coltrane's music, and I've spent hours and hours and hours transcribing, Cousin Mary live. That was like, 15 pages of, and some people are going to appreciate that, and because they want to know where our music came from. And I think, it's, I don't know, like your musical background and influences end up, turning people on to that music. Hopefully, so.
Oh, I have a lot of optimism towards it. I mean, all you have to do now is listen on YouTube, where all this music is available, and you hear things from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the more conventional it was, the more dated it is, the more it's just a product of that time. When you hear something like The Sheriff of Hong Kong by Captain Beefheart, it sounds like it could have been done today.
Yeah,
so I have great faith in the lasting power of unconventional music. One guy I was corresponding with, who sadly passed away, again, he would seem to be from yet a different world than me and Paige, was a hero of mine, this guy Clive Palmer, this banjo player who was an original member of the Incredible Spring Band, then did all these things. And he was saying, the albums I did, they would sell like 200 copies, but all these people are coming to me now and they want to talk about what I did, whereas there is no interest in the stuff that was popular. And I thought that was a really interesting thing. And he was right. Over time, there's a freshness to it that when you're, there's an old quote, and I don't know who said it, but he who is married to the spirit of their generation is a widow in the next. And I feel all forward music just has a timeless quality, whether it's The Rite of Spring or, the first Velvet Underground album, or, you know what I mean, where it can continue to re-speak to people. It's not just caught up in their equivalent of what Pro Tools and fixing things was at that time, because that stuff just doesn't have any nutrition. It's like white rice. Everything's been stripped out of it. It's not going to be,
washed after you cook.
I don't know who said, but if only 200,000 people bought the Velvet Underground Nico album, but like 100,000 of them bought guitars and started bands.
Well, that's an interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. There's another one. I was so honored. I got to play guitar with Bowie for a while, and he said, "No one gets credit for being first, Paige." And it was that was very interesting. Another great thing he said is, he looked at me in rehearsal, advice for budding young songwriters, and he's like, "I nicked half my material from Danny Kaye the Inchworm," and you're like, "What?" So I went and listened to Danny Kaye and the Inchworm
and see how that got transmuted alchemically into that,
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me, though. I was
funny, right?
A diehard Bowie fan as a young person, and a lot of the tracks that you have on here, I want to speak to them. The Kinks, the album leads off with "You Really Got Me." By my estimation, probably the first punk song ever written. If we're going to give it a name.
Yeah.
1965, I think, right? Really
64.
Early.
Yeah.
64. Yeah. Do you want to speak to why the Kinks?
Rob, I will remember this when we went to see the Kinks at the Beacon, I believe, right, Rob? And we were shocked. We're talking 80 something.
Yeah.
And we were so heartened and shocked that after the concert, out front were, kids. We were kids, but we're talking kids, like, teenagers, and they were sitting around comparing notes. I can't believe they played "Oh Demon Alcohol," and they were like, they knew every song.
They were 15 years old.
Yeah, so excited that these kids had discovered the Kinks, because what was going on in 80 whatever, and they were like, ugh, I don't want any part of that. So they were, and the Kinks would play a different concert every time we saw them. It would be different. It wouldn't be the same set. There would be a couple staples, because "Do It Again" was out, and there were, the album, whatever the album at the time was, but that the Kinks were just, Rob always teased me. He's like, I know what you're really want just to be Dave Davies. And I'm like, you're right. Like, I want to be standing next to that guy that's writing these songs and ripping guitar solos. You know, as you say, Louis, the first punk rock song, Distortion, like that solo is insane. It's just so beautiful. And so like, and it still has that excitement. I approach my solos like that, like somebody like Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick. He's not a technician, but the solos are like 8 bars. Dave Davies, it's like 8 bars and it punches you in the face. And it's just timeless. The music is just,
I think they were a good example. Not that they're avant-garde, but now 30 years after that, the Kinks are much more accepted and respected.
Ray, remember the one show we went to see him play, and they had just put out their first record on, I believe it was MCA.
MCA, yeah.
And he was already pissed off. He was yelling into the microphone, "Fuck MCA, fuck so and so, the president." You know, he was the first album on his label, and he's already like upset about him. He's telling them to go fuck themselves. I'm like, God, talk about punk. That guy doesn't give a shit.
Exactly.
I would argue they are avant-garde. I mean, they're and like the key moment was the Everybody's in Showbiz record when they arrived in New York, playing to drag queens and the whole Warhol contingent, and just fell right into it, and with New Orleans horns.
The Dixieland horns. Yeah.
Everybody's going in another direction, and Ray and Dave are just like, no, we're going to do this now.
I know.
Yeah.
Guns.
I was friends with their lighting guy for a while, and he told me about it. They were in Spain, and there was a Ray and Dave fist fight backstage. They were always on each other, and I just thought that was so funny. You're two heroes, and these guys are like, fuck you, no, fuck you, and they're punching each other out. I was like, what was that? Simon, a lighting guy, Simon. I'm like, that's got to be just incredible, man. It's just, I don't know. They just like, they
passion.
You can't keep them down. They're just intense. I also saw Ray did those. He came up with that whole concept of VH1 called Unplug later. Then the West Beth Theater. He started that. Like, he was doing it. I went, and my ex-wife would be like, I don't really get the Kinks. I took her to see that, like in a room of whatever West Beth held, like less than 200 people, and she was crying. She was fucking crying. She's like, "This guy's the greatest songwriter." I'm like, "I told you,
Yeah.
The Beatles. There's Strawberry Fields on here.
Yeah.
Well, the Beatles are a good example of what Page said that Bowie said, no one remembers the first. What was brilliant about the Beatles is they were never the first, but they were the most eloquent group of people to look at what's going on and figure out how to do that. So it shows you don't have to really innovate. And they too would always say, oh, this song is a ripoff of this. And you hear the original and go, you're out of your mind. I Feel Fine is not Matchbox. Here Comes the Sun King. They said, oh, it's a ripoff of Albatross by Fleetwood Mac, and you listen to it and go, in your mind, So a lot of it is people who have some sort of genetic mutation where they think they're ripping off something, but they're coming up with something,
I also, tell me what you think. They kind of grew up.
Oh, real fast.
They moved from kids music to adult music as they saw what was happening, probably influenced by, Lou Reed and others. Like, let's make some grown-up music now.
Yeah. I love that. I was just reading an article on Reverb about, Bob Moog and the synthesizers, and George Harrison bought one of the first ones. It was like, back then it was like $30,000 because they used it on Abbey Road. Here Comes the Sun. Like,
Maxwell Silver Hammer.
And Because also. I believe. But
and Wonderwall.
One of the first, synths, and you had to put all this stuff together, patch cables or whatever, and they had the funds to do it, and they had George Martin, who was pretty good at figuring stuff out. But I think also the thing with the Beatles, if somebody, I never got into the Beatles versus Stones because I love both bands so much. Somebody said something about, I'm just talking about pure melody, and Franz Schubert songs and the Beatles it's so rare to have so much amazing melodic content. come out of one source in one short period of time, and that's compared Beatles songs to the Schubert songs. And I have to agree. I played on the movie Across the Universe that Julie Taymor directed, and got to play with my late great friend T-Bone Walk from the Saturday Night Live band in Hall & Oates, and you know, I was the kind of, I don't know, idiot shit sculptor in the group of all these amazing musicians of Charlie Drayton and T-Bone Walk or whatever. But I had to learn, like, you know, 25 Beatles songs and try to do something interesting with them. And so you get inside that music and tear it apart. And they understood, you know, Cole Porter and everything from Cole Porter to, as Rob said, you know, the blues and whatever. They were listening to everything, incredibly open-minded. And you know, oh, we're going to go to the relative minor for the bridge or whatever. They you know, maybe they didn't know what it was called, but they heard it and they did it, and they were trying to push forward. You say they went, you know, grew from kids to adults, and they were pushing the. Emily Helmet we did a cover of Andrew Bird Can Sing, and I was playing it at a sound check. And in Europe, we had a band called Valiant Thor opening up for us, this kind of young hard rock band. And Benny, the guitar player, said, "God, I love that new song you guys are working on." And I'm like, "Bro, it's the fucking Beatles from like 1966. He's like, "No way!" You know, like, you know, yes, before Thin Lizzy and Iron Maiden, there were harmonized guitar parts. You know,
done by hand, of course. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, both of what you're saying brings up to me when you say, well, the Beatles went through all these things so fast, and Paige was saying Coltrane, you know, sheets of sound to modal bop to this. It's like music was expected to do that. I mean, as someone who's also worked on a lot of urban contemporary over the years for well-known people in dance music, there was a time starting in the 50s going to throughout the early 90s where music was supposed to change. You were putting out a magazine, not a novel. And I don't mean that it wasn't supposed to be substantive. It's right. Supposed to change. And then something happened, and I don't know what, where it's not supposed to change.
Well, I think that's just the popular culture changing.
But the Beatles were expected to change. I mean, that was really Darwinism in rock. I mean, you look at the bands that came out when the Beatles started, that sounded much like the Beatles, the Dave Clark Five, the Trogs. Why didn't these bands keep going? Well, they couldn't master the next step here. And that also brings me to the other thing Paige was mentioning is the tremendous erudition bands like the Beatles and even the Stones had. Mm-hmm. We had, when I first met Paige, we had Mick Jagger's manager, and she put on some mixtape of the Stones where it was like all these things that they listened to for fun. And it's like, these guys really know this music.
I mean, to the point where, in the Coltrane documentary, John Densmore from the Doors saw Coltrane at the Shelley's Manhole, where I, of course, went and stood in front of it and stood on the pavement where Coltrane stood, and Bill Evans as well. And he said, I can't tell you how many times I saw Coltrane and watch him clear the room. Like, people would come and they wanted to hear my favorite things, and he was way past that.
He was already beyond that.
Yeah. Way past that. Within months, and people would come expecting to hear their favorite hits. And I had a record company guy say to me, a famous record company guy, producer, whatever, head of our label, say when we put out the Helmet Betty album, he said, I liked the album. I was expecting more of the last album, and I'm like, we did that. Why would we do that again?
That's an issue.
It didn't make sense to me. I've told bands that I produce, these young bands, I'm like, don't listen to the label, your manager, anyone else. You have to live with these songs for the rest of your life. And if you're lucky, like me, you'll be playing them 30 years later around the world. And the reason I am, and that they're surviving, is because we didn't do the same goddamn thing. You know what I mean? We did something different, and some people are going to drop off and go like, no, as I had a 14-year-old kid who's the son of my friend Dave Berger, who used to do jazz at Lincoln Center. He was a classmate of mine at Manhattan School of Music. And he said, would you talk to my son? He thinks I'm a big nerd. And so, you are a big nerd. You just transcribe Duke Ellington all the time and whatever. He's the foremost authority on Duke in the world. And his son, it was 14. He's like, yeah, I like the Meantime album, but you got a woman with a basket of flowers in the cover, and then there's a weird jazz song. He's like, I don't like it. I'm like, that's cool, good. You know, it's like when you're 25, you're gonna go back and go like, wow, that's a really cool album. You know what I mean? I mean, you would hope somebody would.
Yeah, no, you guys kept going and pushing for that. Thank God. With us, that was a problem, being a more part-time thing. Because when we first came out, it seemed nobody had a crossword to say about anything we'd done. Public radio,
That's
everyone
dangerous.
loved it because it could be explained very easily. It's a fake African band that does famous songs.
Yeah.
And as soon as it went from that, we started encountering resistance. And luckily, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this thing that was popular called ambient music, and we were allowed to be confused with that, and we got another lease on life because of that. But I know some of the difficulties this album will have is there's nothing you can confuse it with. There's no genre going on. You could say, oh yeah, it's kind of like this.
Reminds me of this. Yeah.
That's the best art. It disarms the critical thinking, and you just have to dive into it.
I mean, personally, I love things that the first time I hear them, I think it's just nonsense. And the second time I hear it, I'm like, holy shit. You know, I'm looking for that.
It took me 10 years, I'm not kidding, to when my mentor, hero, guitar teacher, Gary Hagberg said, he's like, Hamilton, you're going to buy Bartok's Juilliard string quartet, 6 string quartets, and the score on Boozy Hawks, and you're going to listen to quartet number 4, first movement. And I was just like, like, what the hell is this? And I was sitting, I had just done a press tour in Europe and treated myself to 3 days at the Prado Museum in Madrid. And I was on my bed with my cassette recorder. You know, it's on my almost 10 years since I started listening to it. It was just like, it just opened up for me. I'm like, yes, you know, this is the most gorgeous music I've ever heard in my life. But it took me a long fucking time. You know, I'm too thick. I can't, you know, but you have to spend time with something.
That's the beautiful thing, is the Brits say when the penny drops. That's the most beautiful thing. That's why I was saying to you guys, I'm first now discovering later Ornette, which I ignored. Like, we knew Don, and we knew what he was doing, Don Cherry, but I had no idea what Ornette was doing at the time. And now I'm listening to it, and a lot of those albums like that. The first time I hear them, I go, well, he just lost it. And then just even the second time I hear it, I go, oh my God, this is like a lesson in life, you know?
When I saw Ornette, he was on my college radio station, and he invited anybody that wanted to come down to soundcheck to come. And I'm like, I'm going to get there early because it's going to be packed. I was the only person. I showed up early. It was in our beer garden, and I sat in the front row, and watching him conduct a rehearsal. He had the double quartet there, and Jamal and DiNardo were having an argument about something, and Ornette just stood with his sax facing forward. He's like, Jamal, why do you feel that way? It's like, DiNardo, he sort of was the peacemaker between these two guys who were arguing in the band about, you know, he's fucking off, he's doing too, you know, and it was really exciting to hear this genius, like, you know, see him conduct a sound check, a rehearsal, and it just great during the concert too. He's like, I'd like to invite anybody that feels like dancing to get up, because it was like seats, and I was like, boom, and I was in the first row, but we had the whole place dancing and going off. And this guy's like, he's so far ahead of the rest of the world. It was just incredible, beautiful, beautiful human being, and no one.
Beautiful soul that comes through.
Just magical.
Well, gentlemen, we could talk all day.
Yes, we could.
We're pretty good at that.
of bringing, well, so many incredible words of wisdom and unique perspective on not just music but life, really in this hour. I'm conscious of keeping it at close to an hour so that folks can maybe, you know, can process it, listen to it a few times as they get it. And of course, I want to close it out and simply say to people, Fairy Tale Aliens with Malumbo and Paige Hamilton is available at malumbo.bandcamp.com. That's my prerequisite to pitch that. Rob Flatow, it's just been such a joy to get to know you and to see the commitment to music that you have and what you're bringing to the world. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Louis. The vibe you've created with Rope-A-Dope has been positively therapeutic for all of us. I mean,
glad to hear it. And Paige Hamilton, thank you for bringing your talents and exposing fans from other parts of your life to this music as well. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. I appreciate it so much. I'm really enjoying our get-togethers online. We talked about Juneteenth and just the impact of being. I feel so honored to be part of your family, what you've created here, and all these amazing musicians. So it's really cool.
Thanks. I'm basically just connecting into a community of musicians, and it's really important right now, I think, for humans to see the way musicians communicate with each other and hang with each other, because it is the model that you're all looking for, of multiculturalism and common language that brings everybody together. So
Absolutely.
for that. All right. Thanks again, fellas.
Thanks.